So we're seeing a fairly interesting development in the Middle East with Donald Trump opening direct talks with Hamas, the militant organization that launched the October 7th terror attacks on Israel and has been fighting Israel really for the last 18 months or so. We've seen Donald Trump now have direct talks with Hamas, or rather, his envoy for hostage affairs has actually gone and held direct talks with Hamas, according to a report by the news organization Axios. The report actually goes on to say that not only is other talks limited to getting U.S. hostages that are still in Hamas custody back. There's apparently one hostage who is still alive, but also about a broader conversation about ending the conflict in the Middle East. That is the conversation right now between the United States and Hamas. This is an extraordinary development because if you've ever seen a Western TV show or a movie, you might remember the phrase, the United States does not negotiate with terrorists. And this has been the stated policy of the United States of America since the 1970s, when U.S. President Richard Nixon was dealing with a hostage crisis again in the Middle East. And then at a press conference, he said, we do not negotiate with terrorists. And after that, it became something of a policy for the United States as well as countries like the United Kingdom. It's not a policy that countries around the world, for example, follow. India, for example, does not follow that policy. But the United States in particular has said that it follows a policy of not negotiating with terrorists. It says that it emboldens these terrorists, legitimizes them, and the payment of ransoms, for example, to free hostages is in some cases very much a morally questionable policy. There has obviously been gray areas in the implementation of this policy, but the idea very much has been that India has that the United States has not had talks with Hamas really for decades. Direct talks between these two entities, but now, of course, you are having these direct talks between the United States as well as between Hamas, not just to free hostages, but also to consider a broader end to the war. Now, Israel has not responded to this extremely well. Israel has simply said that it conveyed its views to the United States about having direct talks with Hamas, but that doesn't say much else. And of course, that basically means that Israel, frankly, if you're able to read between the lines, may have disagreed with the United States' decision to hold these direct talks with Hamas, but beyond that was not in a position to stop the United States from doing something like this. It shows again an interesting aspect of Donald Trump and how he deals with foreign policy, which is that he is very, very unwilling to be constrained by past norms and the old rules of how things were done. He's in fact quite willing to rewrite the playbook in an interesting way that helps him get the outcome that he wants. So that is the big news that has come in at this point in time, directly negotiating with Hamas without publicly getting some buy-in or some support from Israel, which is again an interesting step that previous administrations have not taken. Remember that we are in this setting where Hamas still holds around 60 hostages. Several of them are confirmed to be dead, around 35 of them, according to the Israeli Defense Forces. And again, I'm quoting from the Axios report here, but the Israeli intelligence forces believe that around 22 hostages are still alive, and one, of course, American hostage remains alive. Now, Israel and Hamas had a ceasefire agreement where in the first phase of this ceasefire agreement, there were multiple phases. In the first phase, you would have Israel release several Palestinian prisoners and several hostages would be released by Hamas as well. And while this first phase was going on, a second phase of talks would begin. And that second phase of talks would involve the broader withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. That was supposed to be the conversation. Unfortunately, those phase 2 talks have not really kicked off. And that is where the situation is. Now, the fighting really has not begun again between Israel and Hamas, but at this point in time, Israel has halted humanitarian aid delivery to Gaza. It has come in for a lot of international criticism for making that decision, but that is the state of affairs right now, which is that the ceasefire, while it still continues to hold in effect, Israel is stopping the flow of humanitarian aid to Gaza, where a number of people are living in really quite desperate conditions, and it is unclear how the ceasefire is going to move forward now if broader talks cannot happen to end the conflict in West Asia, which of course was being talked about at some point in time. But this was a question that a lot of people had always raised about whether there was really enough trust between Israel and Hamas to step out and actually figure out a proper solution to the conflict, given the fact that there's such little trust between the two parties to this conflict. But Donald Trump, again, not only is he talking to Hamas, but he's also made a statement where he's come out and he said that there would be hell to pay for Hamas, and also has promised that he will come down hard on Hamas if hostages are not released. So at one level, this is very much a carrot and stick policy, very much Donald Trump stepping out and saying that we could, of course, choose to use overwhelming force and really take the gloves off and give Israel everything it needs to destroy you, but we can also at the same time offer you a reasonable diplomatic solution that will end the conflict in the Middle East, and that will give everyone a good deal. We're already seeing some elements of that come together. We've already seen Arab countries come together and try to put together a plan that would put technocrats in charge of Gaza and remove Hamas from control of Gaza and its 2 million people. That's the conversation from a number of Middle Eastern countries. It would also involve funding for reconstruction and the building of temporary housing units. That is a plan that has been put forward that is very different from Donald Trump's plan of course, building a Middle Eastern Riviera in Gaza and redeveloping it as a sort of tourist destination, and of course also looking at the problem as a real estate developer would, which would also involve moving lots of Gazans out of their homes and into neighboring countries. There is obviously going to be some tension between Middle Eastern countries as well as the United States on this key issue. But for now, the big headline, the United States holding secret talks with Hamas. Where they will go, we do not know, but whether it will lead to the release of the remaining hostage who is still alive, as well as whether it will lead to broader conversations on the end of the war in the Middle East, we don't know. But again, as with Donald Trump, extremely unpredictable, but a new move that he has taken to perhaps end the conflict in the Middle East. We will keep you absolutely updated on this story and get you the latest insights from around the world here on India Today Global. Thank you again.